Fantastic. Good morning, delegates, and welcome to our session on smart cities. My name is Nomonde Ngxola, and I will be your chair for today's session. I hope you're going to enjoy this topic because I think it's quite pertinent in a world where we've been plunged into the fourth industrial revolution, thanks to the pandemic, in a world where accountability, connectivity, digital divide, and costs really stack up against how do we make this concept of smart cities or utilities, make them a utility. And today's lineup is really centered around having these pertinent conversations with our esteemed panelists. We've got a riveting lineup of speakers today. We've got Ms. Rose Moyo, who's a Director of Enterprise Wireless Solutions at Huawei Enterprise South Africa. We've also got Mr. Pieter Pinard, who's the Chairman of the IoT Industry Council in South Africa. I think it's going to be particularly interesting to hear from you, Pieter, because we've got the councils, the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission, and we really want to hear what your area is doing from a practical perspective, and maybe what other government constituencies are assisting you in sort of executing on that mandate. Then we've got Dominic, who's a Vice President from Smart State Initiatives, Arizona Commerce Authority from the US. And I think what makes the session quite interesting is that we've got representation across the globe. So even looking forward to hearing how the different models have been utilized and adopted in the different geographies from the US to a country like South Africa, which is effectively seen as an emerging market. And even testing if the model applied in your first world countries is practical for, an emerging market like South Africa, given some of the challenges that we have. So I'm really looking forward to sort of talking more about, we understand the concept of smart cities, but really how do we practicalize this? How do we make this tangible? How do we make sure there's buy-in from the citizens? And how do we ensure that there's accountability? And how do we talk about the digital divide? Because I think, you cannot have a smart city if the city is not connected. So the backbone of any form of, digital initiative hinges on a network and a good quality network. So I'm really looking forward to that. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce to the panel and to engage us today is Ms. Rose Moyo. If you could please then share with us the perspective that Huawei has insofar as the topic of discussion.
Thank you very much, Norma. Just to start off with, I just want to put into perspective the discussion when it comes to connectivity as a critical enabler within the smart cities. And Huawei being a global ICT provider that actually is focusing on bringing digital divide to every person, home, organization for a fully connected, intelligent world. Having said that, I think just to give you the background, where we are today is we are building towards the trends which we have currently is we are looking at all things sensed, which is the physical world, making the physical world to the digital signals and really making them also intelligent and taking into cognizance where we are sitting in Africa that it's not a green field. No city is a green field. There is some existence when it comes to whatever infrastructure that there is, and how ICT is going to play a pivotal role within that particular space and maybe bring value to whatever we are trying to address within the smart cities. So we fundamentally, what we have just put into is to say, for everything that we have sensed, for it to be intelligent, it has to be transported one way or another. And this is actually being done in the background of what is the real issues that we are actually, the technologies that are underpinning all that, because they are not actually doing anything in isolation. They've got co-dependence on each other. We're looking at mobility, we're looking at big data and cloud today. And we're saying now the ICT infrastructure has become really the foundation of the intelligent world, and more so when we look at connectivity. Addressing the issue of connectivity, which is basically very critical, mostly in Africa, the issue of national broadband is very critical. This is critical for inclusivity because at the end of the day, we're looking at what do we need to do when we have to have a true national coverage, which includes everybody for what the chair has said, to say we don't have to actually have to bridge that also digital divide, and taking into cognizance the applications that we are now looking into when we are saying the services. We are looking at the diverse services that you can actually see on my slide that we're talking about. And in most cases, what we're looking at is also high bandwidth. So we're looking at really also security. So it's basically how do we look at the different connectivities that we need to address when we are actually addressing this. Because we are talking of smart cities, but I would rather say it's more of smart communities, because it's not in isolation than anything else. So really, fundamentally, the rural coverage becomes also an issue. So it's a combination of, when you're looking at the backbone, you're looking at the combination of different technologies that you can actually be using. Having said that, we're now evolving to a situation where we are saying a campus to date. And when we look at in a city perspective, everybody is existing in a campus. We're looking at a campus as basically maybe a factory, government offices, whether it's a mall, whether it's an airport or school. It will be actually a mimic of the campus. And we are moving from a traditional campus where we are saying it's just a physical thing. The second thing was basically where we are sitting currently, I think in most organizations in Africa, is basically connecting people and the campus coverage and expansion. But we still also see silos among the data systems that are there, whether it's a utility data system, whether it's something, or maybe your office work systems. There are so many silos that we are talking about. Whether it's security, also it's actually a silo. So you have got systems that are specifically looking at that. So for us to be actually looking at that, I'm also saying now, for us to harness and say we are creating a smart city, we have to be looking at a fully connected campus, which is basically connectivity, linkage and convergence. For that would be the foundation of innovation and actually adding value to any organization, any service that we would actually want to give within the city. Having said that, we would say, what is been the trend recent with some of the stakeholders that we have partnered with globally? We have seen some of them, they're saying, we're taking it to the rural, we're taking it to the campus, which is typically, if we're looking at the case of Uganda, how they've looked at it, Bangladesh, how they've looked at rural coverage. This is basically connection to create value at the end of the day. So it's actually inclusive that we are looking at. That's the fundamental to say, to date, I think what is driving everything is the amount of information that will be required, the cloud that is required, and also moving even intelligence to the end makes really the importance of connectivity to be addressed in a holistic view, from really the campus infrastructure itself, to say, how do you harness the data, and now say, moving from the physical campus and say you're now looking at your organization as a fully connected campus that is saying breaking the physical space into a digital space. Having said that, I would also, just to summarize and conclude the introduction for setting the platform, is we're looking at, from everything, what is the value of connectivity in driving smart city connectivity? We're looking at collecting. The first thing is, most of the issues is, most we have sensors, whether it's IoT or whether it's cameras or whatever, and devices, whether it's your mobile set of cell phones. That actually now we have a digital twin where we are creating the version of the physical things and other things to a digital. Then connectivity. I think one of the things that we have actually realized is, I would want to quote this to say, it's a key enabler, because a digital twin can actually, a connectivity can exist without digital twin, but a digital twin cannot exist without a connectivity. So this is basically some of the things that actually we're looking at, and really to say, where are we going? Because everybody today, even in smart cities, we are talking about digital transformation. Where is business driven, value driven, creating opportunities, now transforming business and organization and processes and competencies, which means now really the key pillar is how do we harness within the connectivity space and say we are going to be creating that using the various technology, using the private networks, using the public networks, and say how do we harness that and make sure that there is openness for integration and interconnectivity going forward. That's in a nutshell what I would say in actually introducing this. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rose, for that. I think it was a nice preface and prelude to the discussion. And I think perhaps before we let you go, and maybe hear from the other speakers, I'd be interested to find out, I think in terms of the concept and the infrastructure that you need to bring a smart city to life, being the connectivity, making sure that, concepts like your devices and your surveillance cameras are in place. This is a great concept, and I think we understand it. But I'm more interested in finding out the practical side of if you say you're going to a rural area and you want to make a rural area smart, where does the process start in a place like that? Because does it not contradict the concept of city, number one? And number two, who then is accountable, I think, for that, would you say, in terms of the mandate for ensuring that that city or that rural area becomes connected and is able to enjoy the benefits and fruits of a smart city? I wanted to just add something, Rose, before you proceed, is that there was a beautiful definition I got from BuySmart around what is a smart city. And it talks about a smart city being a city that uses technology to provide services and solve city problems. A smart city does things like improve transportation, accessibility, it improves social services and promotes sustainability and gives its citizens a voice. So I'm keen on just engagement around that. How do we ensure that while we have the infrastructure, while we have the technology, while we understand the concept, how does it enable that delivery within a rural context?
I think to start off with, I would say being driven, you said whose accountability is. I think we'll look at who should be leading on this thing. When we look at that, I think the basic is we're looking at government building, it actually leading, and everybody is a stakeholder. We have got a diverse stakeholders that need to engage together to say, how do we build these smart communities or safe cities? And how do we look at technologies? Because the technologies are there to expand. Sometimes what is lacking is basically the strategy going forward or the development going forward to get to the digital divide. So basically that's the first thing I would say. It's one of those things that we need to do. And to your definition, exactly what you said to say, basically a smart city, I think the only thing that I would say is ICT plays an integral role in enabling the smart city in the scope of the smart city. That is why I'm saying connectivity becomes a key enabler. If you are talking about, first, let's look at even public safety or safety within the city, whether it's a camera or whatever. What needs to be done is connectivity first, to say you have that connectivity, and how do you report that incident should an incident happen. So that talks to really connectivity being critical when it comes now to say, what are the services that we want, and what do we have enough connectivity that actually carries the services, because it has to be business driven when we are looking at the connectivity and the challenges that we need to address. Whether you're going to be looking at the spatial data that you are collecting, at the end of the day, it's going to get somewhere, because we are looking at actually harnessing the data, integrating, and also the competitiveness to say, how do we now say, as an organization, or maybe as a city, how do we now have a single source of truth and have shared data and sharing data securely? So it talks to connectivity to say, how do we now, because it becomes really the nerve that is actually linking anything within the city.
No, I hear you, Rose. I hear you. I think I'm still not quite clear on the connection behind the technology and practicalize it from a service delivery perspective, especially in a rural context. But I think we'll pause for now, and we'll engage a bit later once we've had all the different speakers give us their perspective and take on the topic at hand. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker to the panel, Mr. Pieter Pinard, who happens to be the chairman of the IoT Industry Council in South Africa. Pieter, I'm really looking forward to hearing a lot more about, the mandate of the IoT Council, how they are practicalizing, the concept, because I found Internet of Things is a bit of a misnomer. People get that it's connectivity and connecting things and it's about ubiquity. But in terms of how the concept of IoT comes to life in the South African context, I'm really interested in hearing that and some of the departments that you're working with. So over to you, and I'll engage you a little bit later after your delivery.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on the forum. So IoT and Council, I think we've got quite a big task on our shoulders. But we see it very simply as being a area where IoT players, customers and suppliers and manufacturers come together and can talk, and we enable that conversation. We do, however, also encourage our members and our customers, or our members mainly, to consider a smart city in the topics of today, from the ground level up and not from the top level down, because a lot of people play in the nice to have, but where smart city starts is the data integrity. And I think the previous speaker mentioned on coverage and on the data that comes into the ecosystem. So it is very important for us to make sure that we have a architecture that is a global architecture that is able to bring together a range of different technologies, and connectivity is at the heart of that. So we could have general normal day-to-day GSM or 5G type of technologies that work comes into play, but there is also other technologies that will start enabling other areas of that. So we split that up into two areas. We split that up into consumers, so the consumer usage in smart city, which where the transport and the user aspects will come in very strongly. And we also split it out in the second portion, which is then utilities and machines. So Internet of Things itself is very machine-to-machine based type of applications, where we start talking about the base information that is required to improve the efficiencies and the cost effectiveness of municipalities, and then it rolls up into the fancier parts of smart city, where connectivity and drones and robots and all of those kind of things start playing a role. So our approach is definitely to look at the basics. We go back to basics, look at water, electricity, gas. It normally comes down to utilities. How do we get the service delivery of utilities more efficient? How do we get the billing and cash collection of that more effective? And then, of course, how do we reduce the risk to the municipalities by improving the entire ecosystem for that? And that then it builds into citizen apps. It builds into other areas. And that model, we are currently working with the Development Bank of South Africa, as well as the Cyril Ramaphosa Industry 4.0 Commission, and that we need to build into a rural state. And we've got two POC sites or sites that we're working with, which is the smallest of the municipalities, and a mid-range type of municipality, to ensure that whatever we design and whatever we come up with is multi-tenanted, multi-deployable, so we can deploy it from the smallest municipality in the most rural area all the way through to a big metropole. But the concept and the blueprint that we are busy with, that is the key of where we are. And then the split between service delivery, which is utilities and vehicles and efficiencies, versus the more above the line type of applications like internet speeds, self-driving cars, and so those things that is generally seen a lot more in the smart city environment than it is than what the first would be, which is the utilities. But without the utilities, without making sure the efficiencies are there, I very much doubt that we'll get to the smarter, cleverer, and fancier bits of the smart city. That in itself is the detail. And the last thing I want just to add to that is that the quality of the data is key for us to be able to achieve our goals. We need to be able to receive data that is trustworthy and it's managed properly. There's many technologies in South Africa alone that enable that information grab or the information collation, but the way it's managed at the back end, so when it gets into the cloud, is just as important. But the key here would be quality data.
100%. Pieter, before I engage a bit further, I just want to read another abstract about smart cities that maybe just kind of dials it down a little bit further. And it says smart cities describe the city's ability to create well-being for citizens. But it's not just about how citizens benefit from the services the government provides to them, but a key element of smart cities is valuing citizen participation. Yeah. The city uses the tool to collect data in real time, which I think yourself and Rose alluded to, about all kinds of things, things like traffic, air, water quality, solar radiation, and really gives government the ability to act immediately and solve any problem. Now, the question I have in this context, and I'm going to speak within the South African context, where we've had government try to install technology initiatives like the e-toll, for example. And I like the citizen participation element because I feel like any technological deployment in an organization, if you don't have a careful change management approach where you're inviting the end users to be participant, in the adoption of the technology that's been installed, you're not going to have the utilization and the benefits from actually having this technology. It'll be a white elephant. And I think if I reference it at a city level, e-toll happens to be a brilliant example, number one. So that citizen involvement, I think, is really key. But secondly, in a country like ours, Pieter, and I think you'll know that accountability when it comes to expenditure, because there's a real cost to deploying a smart city. I mean, having these sensors, having the connectivity and the bandwidth, having the cameras, it's money. There's money attached to it. Ultimately, the citizens will pay for it through our salary, yours and our salary. But the accountability sometimes, and I think the accountability in terms of, when are we going to finish building this city, in terms of how much is it really going to cost us, and when do we start seeing the benefits, because I think for me, that's the practical part of the smart cities concept that I really want to hear more of. And I feel like is lost in the excitement of, the concept. Correct.
Yeah, and I think transparency is the key word there, the key takeout of that. And I think in any design of any solution that we encroach on, we look at different role players and different stakeholders. So we have the city and the municipality being a role player in that space, but we also have the citizens as being a stakeholder. And when we design technologies and solutions, we need to take into consideration that multiple role stakeholders in the process, and make sure that we design a solution that will talk directly to each one of them. And that is the user. So if I use water, for instance, a user at their house, like at my house here, I want to know how much water I've used on a daily basis or an hourly basis for that matter. And it could be down to every minute basis if that's what I'm looking for. And I will derive value out of that. And the reason for that might be water leaks that I need to fix on my side, which is going to be for my account. But it might also be that I might detect or my kids might be using too much water. So that could be a value proposition that is for the homeowner. Roll that up into a city environment where burst leaks, general consumption, and billing becomes a key value driver when it comes to their involvement in this broader scoping of the process or the value creation or the value chain throughout a smart city development. And then, of course, you have a third stakeholder, which is then the service providers, and the service providers that does the installation and so forth of technology, or has to do the meter reading, or have to do all of those kind of things. They also have a stake in the process of efficiency, risk, and reliability. And I think if you've got a multi-pronged approach into quality of data and usability of data, that would be a completely different story. So everybody needs to see the value. And I think with e-tolls as an example, if the people of Johannesburg understood the value that they were getting out of these roads, it might have been a completely different story, because it was built solely for generating income. In my mind, there was no participation, there was no value proposition to the citizens of Johannesburg. So I think that is where smart city becomes very crucial. Is that it is not a top-down approach. It's not a bottom-up approach. It's a combination of engagement, of value propositions for each person in the value chain. And it needs to be clear, and it needs to be concise, and it needs to be consistent, so that we have a longer-term value that is not maybe the intent of that. Now, I'll go back to the water as being the application. The intent of doing smart water would most probably be to improve billing and the capability for the city to bill. But in that process, we are creating capabilities that will give other people or other stakeholders within the process value. And that value could be, as I said, my kids using too much water, or the garden getting too much water, et cetera, et cetera. And once we start deploying solutions based on that as a framework, then we're winning.
100%. The other question I have, Pieter, is that your telcos typically will invest in infrastructure based on the number of subscribers in a specific area. So you look at a company, telco like Vodacom, where when they build their base stations, they look at how many subscribers do we anticipate to have in this area to justify the investment in building the infrastructure. And what I'm interested in as well is that when we talk about bringing the concept of smart cities to the rural areas, where even the infrastructure in terms of just electricity, sourcing the electricity, the water is not even built. People in rural areas are able to just connect to a pipe and have streamless amounts of water flowing into their homes without it being metered, without them paying for it. So how would the concept of smart cities in a practical instance work when the commercial model for a telco like Vodacom, for that, it wouldn't necessarily work, because you find the subscribers and the nature of the people in that area maybe don't fit the criteria or the profit margins Vodacom would like to recognize. But secondly, the infrastructure in the rural setting is not geared up to be able to be automated. So we're able to instantaneously see, pipe leakage, or instantaneously, areas where there's a surge in electricity consumption. So how do we practicalize that given those challenges in those settings?
It's fairly simple. I think this is not dependent on the Vodacoms of the world. The technology define or definition of how we go forward with it is there is multiple technology capabilities now, very low cost. With the advent of the IoT technology stack, there is the ability in rural areas to deploy a network at a fraction of the cost of what a Vodacom tower would be, for instance. So the value that we discuss for the different stakeholders, the value derived by the municipality of efficiency and knowing where it's going. And when I work with the smaller municipalities, it's always, we're buying bulk water, we don't know how much we're getting. So measuring just the bulk water coming into reservoir, and then measuring that, and then how much is being dispersed, and when it's dispersed, how many of these are being, or how much of this water is reaching the end customer or the end user, and how much is being wasted. And that we measure through pressure, and we measure it through flow meters, where the cost is not the burden of the consumer, but the consumer can get the value out of it, because the cost of the network is vastly reduced, and that is how smart cities are enabled in today's age. The technology is so vastly different in price point, so it's vastly cheaper to run the technology than it was in the past, and you can run technology much further and on battery and all of these other features that it comes through as part of IoT. Allows things that in the past was just too expensive to do.
100%. Somewhat, it does. Look, I definitely understand why I'm at a municipal level. There's value in having precision in how much water you buy, and there's value in you being able to ascertain how much you're actually consuming. My only concern then becomes, once the budget is made available for the ability to put in these IoT devices and solutions within the respective municipalities, there's unfortunately been a track record of, budget being set aside for certain projects, but hasn't been quite utilized for that. And it makes it quite, I think not just at a municipal level, but even at an end user level, where I want to know with precision how much I'm consuming and my household is consuming, and if the cost is justified. Because a lot of the time I think what many body corporates do is that they aggregate, but you don't necessarily get a view of what you're actually consuming. So I definitely see the downstream effects. I just get worried about when we make available the budgets and the timelines associated, and making sure that those who've been given the mandate execute timeously, and we get to see the benefits quickly. Because right now, Pieter, IoT is a concept that I think people in the ICT industry understand. If you sit at a dinner table and you try and explain it to your wife or your friends who are not in the industry, it's a very pie in the sky concept, which also worries me, because we need to be socializing this to people so there's buy-in. I think that's really my bone of contention, Pieter. And I suppose it's not for you to necessarily solve or answer, but it really is to say, how do we ensure that we actually can see the fruits of implementing a solution like IoT if there's little accountability in the process?
Yes. So 100%, and that's adoption. So adoption of IoT globally has not been as great as it should be, as it could be. So the key is adoption, and then when the data becomes available, then we have got real physical trusted data we can hold people accountable. So when I go into a municipality or in a city, the intent for us is to save the city the operational expenditures, because the way I understand it now is that their budgets are split into operational and capital. Capital is which they can get on an annual basis. They can get more and more and more, or that is managed fairly well. Operational is staff, and that stays the same, and you need to do more with less on a monthly basis or an annual basis. So it's very difficult for municipalities to spend operational budget, because it's going to be the difference between 5 people and 4 people if they want to bring technology into the mix, and that I think drives adoption in the municipal space quite a bit. But the converse to that is that efficiencies that is achieved by putting technology in place instead of people is vast. And the ability of that money that we're spending, or that we're spending differently, enables education for people that would have gone around and done meter reading, instead of being a person with a clipboard, can now become an engineer in installation of meters, for instance, which is a skill that can be taught. So I think there's rejection, or there's an adoption issue based on knowledge and not understanding it, and there's also an adoption issue that is based on, well, we're going to lose jobs, and that is not the intent of IoT. The intent of IoT is, and the national program with the president is very heavily focused on education. It's very heavily focused on skill transfer from where currently we have engineers, and the engineers are in the field of technology, where IoT becomes and gives them the capability of saying, well, it's not my engineers anymore. There is, anybody can do this, or a much bigger proportion of the population can actually operate within the IoT space, because the technology is simple, it's cheap, and it can be strung together very quickly in that space. So skill development is not, we are not doing away with people's jobs. We are re-educating the resources. That's very key.
I think you raise a very critical point. I think the advent of faster adoption of IoT creates room for high-end skills, as opposed to being the guy who sort of assembles and puts together the CCTV surveillance. You could be the guy who actually is responsible for the deployment of the software.
Yeah.
You're the guy who's responsible for the data. You're the guy. I mean, there's quite a nice knock-on effect, and I think you raise a key point in sort of saying there is a upstream benefit for people, especially for government, because government's mandate is the welfare of people more than it is a profit motive. So very pertinent point touched on over there, Pieter, but we can chat for hours. I'm very passionate about the topic, but we do have time constraints, unfortunately, and we do still have another speaker that I need to introduce. Thank you so much for your time, but I mean, obviously it's a very interesting topic, and I think we definitely need to have and hear more about that. Next on, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dominic Papa, who's the Vice President of Smart State Initiatives in Arizona Commerce Authority, the US of A. Dominic, welcome. I'm actually looking forward to hearing some great success stories or understanding how the concept was actually implemented within the context of the USA, because I think there's often a misconception that, it's easy in the US, connectivity is not an issue, bandwidth is, or rather, data is cheap. The bulk of your cities and states are pretty urbanized and connected. So the concept is actually a lot easier to implement, and the buy-in is higher in your geography than what we would be faced with. And I'm keen to hear you engage us a little bit more on that. Over to you, Dom.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think the conversation has been terrific so far. I've been taking so many notes because I think this topic is so pertinent no matter where in the globe that you are. So just to set the context a little bit for the audience here, I do work for the government, so I do focus on the governance model of these initiatives in smart cities, and how do we get our governments, our local governments, whether that's cities or regions, to actually effectively execute on these opportunities. Because I love that conversation, Pieter, that you were having, is while IoT and these technologies are great, unless you budget for them, unless you kind of effectively plan, they are unaffordable for especially our rural and remote cities. Especially if you're a city of 7,000 people, these sorts of technologies are very difficult to afford, very difficult to deploy. And the impact of that is that your citizens are without connectivity, they're without water, they're without electricity, etc. And so what we focused on in Arizona, and I'm excited to tell this story, is that how do we get our cities, our governments, to actually collaborate? Because when it comes to technology, when you collaborate, collaboration will be your competitive advantage. And so let me just set the context of what we've done in Arizona in the greater Phoenix region. So the greater Phoenix region is 22 cities and towns. It's the fourth largest region in the United States. It's got the number one largest public research institution in the country. It's got the number one largest community college district in the country. But again, it's got 22 cities and towns all slammed together in one large region. So it ranges from the number 5 largest city in the country, which is the city of Phoenix, 1.5 million people, to the very smallest city, very rural, very remote, with about a approximate population of about 2,000 people. So very urban to very rural. And so what we've decided to do is, how do we get those 22 cities to think together, to act together, to innovate together, and then to procure technology and infrastructure together, so that way we can think about building a smart region instead of individual smart cities. Because when you start to think together and procure together, then those technologies that Pieter was talking about actually becomes affordable, not only for the 5th largest city in our country, but also for the very, very small, very remote city, because we understand that our our futures are built together. And so we need to actually act together, innovate together, and procure together. So I'm really excited about this conversation. And just so, just to paint a picture of the state of the unconnected in America, we understand that, 6 out of 10 low-income students have to attend online class via cell phone or search for public Wi-Fi access points, while others simply have disappeared from their class rosters because they don't have a device to get online. And this challenge is even more frustrating when you think about our minority communities. There's approximately half of Americans living on tribal lands, and 1/3 of those living in rural areas of America, especially in Phoenix, that still don't have reliable internet connections. So their job opportunities, online businesses, and remote access to healthcare have suffered tremendously. Now, roughly 1/3 of African American and Hispanic households struggle with digital access, digital adoption, and digital literacy. We did a report from the Dutch Bank that estimates 76% of Black and 62% of Hispanics could be shut out or underprepared for 86% of the jobs in the United States by 2045. I mean, it's just incredible, those statistics, when you start to really think about it. And so what we've done is try to develop a strategy and a plan with those 22 cities, those 22 towns in one region to think about what is our commitment, how are we going to connect the unconnected in our area. So we've set a couple of North Stars. One is inclusivity. How are we connecting the unserved and underserved communities, the urban, the rural, the remote, to K-12, community colleges, and university educational resources? How are we preparing them? How are we including them in these resources? So inclusivity. The second one is scalability. How are we developing the playbooks and the templates that all cities, all towns can learn from, adopt, and then deploy, so that way their communities can benefit from the learnings and the deployments of other cities? So scalability is 2. Third, sustainability. We're making sure that the persistent economic, community, education, and relationship support must be baked in from the very beginning. So sustainability. So our 3 North Stars are inclusivity, scalability, and sustainability. And so what we've done, and this is to wrap it up, is how are we executing on this? So again, those 22 cities, towns in one region in Greater Phoenix, Arizona, we're bringing together, we're building a broadband task force where those 22 mayors come together and they actually start to align, prioritize, and coordinate on all of their broadband and connectivity infrastructure investments, so that way we can leverage the economies of scale and the purchasing power of 22 cities to actually build out our connectivity infrastructure across all of those 22 cities. So that way, not only our most urban, most rural, or most urban and metro populations benefit, but also those rural, small, remote towns of 2,000 people can benefit as well. Because think about it, when I'm a mayor of a town of 2,000 people on the remote end of Greater Phoenix, if I can purchase broadband infrastructure together with the 1.5 million people of the city of Phoenix, I can actually afford this technology, this infrastructure. So what we're doing is building that, again, that governance model to enable mayors who have the authority to purchase technology like IoT. They can actually purchase those technologies, those infrastructure, together with large and small communities. So that way, both urban and rural populations can benefit from these technologies. So that's what we're doing in Greater Phoenix. That's what we're doing in Arizona. And it's exciting to be a part of this conversation because honestly, when it comes to technology, infrastructure, solving the digital divide, we're all in this challenge together. So again, collaboration is going to be our competitive advantage. So I've enjoyed listening to this conversation so far.
Fantastic. That was so interesting, Dom, because I think the model you guys used was quite a little bit novel in terms of what I've heard so far. I think a model like that is quite useful and sustainable in a state where accountability is key in the transparency, because if you talk about kind of collaborating so it makes it more affordable and accessible, it's great because, economies of scale. I get that.
Totally.
But the challenge then becomes, I think, and I don't want to belabor this point, but it's only because I wanted to work in our country, is that there's an absence of accountability. We don't have an absence of money. We have the fiscal budget to be able to carry out these, projects and these solutions. And I think a key thing, just to give it an example, we've got 9 provinces in our country. And the different provinces have got their own municipalities, obviously that govern the different major cities in those provinces. But they all get a budget coming from national government that's trickled down at a provincial level to a municipal level. So everyone's got their own budget. But I think the challenge sometimes that we have is, precisely that the gap in knowledge, there isn't a standardization. I think I like the playbook and template approach you have adopted, because it kind of says, guys, this is the template. It doesn't matter the composition of people in your state, in your municipal area. It doesn't matter your level of technological advancement. Let's all kind of standardize, because I think it helps keep people a little bit more honest, to be honest, Dom. What I'm curious to find out in your situation is, how long has that process, how long have you sort of given yourselves for that process, and where are you in that process, and what have been some of the challenges you didn't anticipate to find along the way?
Great questions, great statements as well. We only started this effort about 1.5 years ago. So we launched the Smart Region initiative in 2018. And you're absolutely right. The hardest part was actually just getting these governments to actually, or these cities to actually talk together. It's amazing that even though you share a border or just jurisdictional boundary with another community, these CIOs, these city managers, these mayors, they actually never talked to each other, which in my mind is kind of frustrating, because Phoenix resident, I travel across boundaries every day. I want my road to be smooth, no matter if I'm in Phoenix or Tempe or Mesa, which are their cities in Arizona. So just getting the structure and the governance model for these different levels of government to actually communicate and collaborate was the biggest challenge. But you're exactly right. What was our biggest selling point to these mayors, to these city managers, was the fact that, look, we understand, right? They get their budget from the state government, or we're getting our budget from the federal US government as well. But you can't solve these challenges that are so complex, so diverse by yourself. You need to actually partner together to solve these challenges, because if you don't, at least in America, if you don't solve this challenge, people will move. They'll move out of your city. They'll go to California. They'll go to Texas. They'll go to New Mexico. They'll go to Colorado. And so if you want a thriving place where people want to live, work, and learn, you've got to solve these challenges. You've got to work together. And so that started to resonate with mayors. The fact that, hey, if you want to have a city that someone wants to live in, you've got to solve these problems. And the only way to do that is to collaborate. And then I will say the last point is, when we got the cities actually together, the 4th largest region in the United States, guess what? The private companies started to come and say, hey, how can we invest with you to solve these challenges? So we had Intel come and say, how can we lend our engineering support to help you solve your connectivity challenges? Because you know what? Intel is in this region. We want our employees to live in a thriving metropolitan rural region that is successful, that is advanced. And so they started to invest in the community with us, because they saw the cities coming together, the mayors coming together. And so the private companies started to come together with us. And again, I think it's this thing where, as a government guy, if you kind of lead by example, if you say, okay, we're going to work together with all these other cities, we're going to actually work together, then you get the investment from the industry, you get the investment from the universities, and then you can actually do something really impactful. So it's been a work in progress, but it's been a fun adventure so far.
Love that, Dom. I love it. I'm excited hearing you talk about it. And I think the key thing that you've said is that if you as government lead by example, I think naturally private sector will follow suit and will definitely want to be part of, the process, and maybe allow you to use their resources as well as their technologies. But I think the precursor to that is government actually knowing what they need to do, having the skills, having the right people to chart that blueprint, isn't it? Because you've got to, I think where we're at now is that, the word fourth industrial revolution right now, I almost want to scream when I hear it, because it means different things to different people, to different countries, to different sectors, right? It's so broad, it's so big. Same as digital transformation. It's a bit of a misnomer. And I think, you have different interpretations, which makes it difficult to actually elucidate it to a point where it's, okay, this is what we actually mean when we say we're going to digitally transform this state or this municipality. And how do you think, what is the formula of getting the right people to give you the right definition, to create the right blueprint that we can use to create our playbook and our templates? I can then just standardize and trickle down.
You're so on point. I can't even tell you how amazing you are with that comment. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I don't know if it's the same in South Africa right now, but we are facing a massive retirement from our government, where so many people are leaving our government, and now there's this vacuum of lack of talent within our municipalities. And so we are struggling to understand, how are we going to train and skill the people that are controlling the municipalities' budgets in order to understand IoT, the fourth industrial revolution. And so what we've done is partner very closely with our university, Arizona State University, and some other private partners to really focus on how are we training and skilling the next generation workforce to understand these technologies, these governance models, because you are so spot on. The biggest worry is not the technology. The technology is easy. It's the people and it's the process that are the very worst parts to deal with. And unfortunately, there is just a lack of that skilled workforce within our governments right now. And so we are grappling with this exact challenge right now. And so what we're trying to do is make government sexy, so to speak, by doing a lot of these and trying to incentivize people instead of going to Silicon Valley and making hundreds of thousands of dollars, getting them to do great things for the municipalities. But it's a challenge that we're struggling with. So if anyone has a great answer for that, please let me know, because that's our biggest worry.
Dom, it's been such a pleasure. We're going to definitely chat some more. I'm going to connect with you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. You guys have been a great panel. I think it's been such a great topic. We definitely can chat some more about it. But thank you for your contribution, and thank you for sharing your stories and perspectives. Much appreciated. Have a fantastic day forward. Thanks, everyone. And until we meet again. Thank you.